afternoon, everyone. My name is Arsenio, not to be confused with Arsenio. I was born in the 80s. He was famous in the 80s. Welcome to my cooking show. Today we're going to be making Alfredo. So for everybody who's like, ooh, I can cook, I can make Alfredo, wife me, I have the best basic Alfredo recipe for you today. Now the Alfredo we're making is going to be using butter, approximately a half a cup of butter. I use whipped butter, so mine might look a little different. Cream cheese, you're going to be about 7.5 to 8 ounces of cream cheese for this. I used garlic. I diced it myself. I used 3 cloves of garlic. It's going to be a little tricky. I got the milk. Alright, milk. 2 cups of milk. About 6 ounces of Parmesan cheese. And then we have some ground black pepper. I actually use garlic pepper for this. And for garnishment, I use dried parsley. So, first what you want to start off doing is you want to make sure that everything is heated properly. So you want to turn on your stove because you're going to have to melt your butter first. And melting butter is always a fun process, right? So we're just going to scoop the butter out of the container into the pan. Get as much of the butter out as possible. Now I pre-measured everything to make it easier, but if you want to measure as you cook, that is kind of like your own thing, whatever makes you feel better. So I turned the stove on to a little higher than medium because I'm cooking with dairy products and when you don't want to end up burning anything when you're cooking with dairy. So we're just going to melt the butter real quick, get it real melty. You see the pan's already kind of hot, so the butter started melting as soon as it hit the pan. So we finna stir and we finna whip it. We finna melt the butter. Now I'm stirring the butter to try to get it all over the pan. I don't know if that actually works or makes it any faster, but it's what I like to do and it makes me feel better. So we're just gonna do it like that. So we melted the butter. Okay, got the butter all melty. Then after we melt the butter, make sure it's all melted. Actually, I had some on the back of my spoon that I didn't notice, so we're gonna finish melting the butter. We're gonna add the Parmesan, or the cream cheese. Sorry, not the Parmesan cheese. And we're gonna melt that, and we're gonna add the garlic too. So when I hear that, I think it's a little too hot for me to be cooking all this on, so I'm actually going to turn it down just a wee bit. That butter is kind of popping. I don't want the butter to pop on me. So I'm kind of just stirring it around, mixing everything together, making sure the garlic. I actually used garlic and herb cream cheese when I did this, so that it adds a little more flavor, so I don't actually have to season the Alfredo too much. So you're just going to melt this down so you can make it a little bit creamy. Because the next step, you're going to be adding the milk, and you want to make sure this is all creamy for texture before you add the milk in. So we're just gonna keep whipping it around. Make sure it's smooth. You don't want to add the milk when it's clumpy because it's gonna change the whole consistency of it and make it a little different. I'm still gonna turn it down too because I don't really want to hear that popping noise. That makes me feel like I'm doing it too hot. So we got it creamy. Okay. Can you see? We got it all creamy. All right. Now we're going to slowly add the milk. And now when I start adding the milk, I'm actually going to change to a whisk. Because I feel like it's a little easier to do this with a whisk. So we're just going to whisk the milk in a little bit at a time. Drop a little milk, stirry. Drop a little milk, stir some more. And you notice as you're doing this, the consistency is now going to start getting the creamy texture that you wanted it to be for the actual Alfredo. So I'm just literally stirring as I pour. Stirring as I pour. And it's gonna get kind of creamy. It's gonna be a little creamier than what you normally would see in Alfredo, but you still gotta add the Parmesan, just remember that. So don't get too scared when you're doing all this. Don't be scared now. So I got my milk in there. All right, now we're gonna add the pepper. Now I use about a teaspoon of pepper. You can kind of just salt and pepper, garlic, whatever you want to taste. Whenever you look at a recipe, I always follow the base ingredients as far as what it needs for, you know, the milk, the butter. But when it comes to seasoning, kind of just play around with things yourself. Like follow it the first time, but you'll kind of see how it tastes and then go from there. So we're adding the Parmesan cheese. I'm actually going to turn the heat up a little bit after doing all that. Just a wee bit. I tend to cook between 6 and 4, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna let that sit for a minute. I'm gonna let it hit to a boil so that everything can mix up real well. And then our Alfredo should be done here shortly. It actually is looking pretty good. I can smell everything that's going on in the pot. I'm not mad at it. The consistency looks almost perfect. Just gonna wait for it to boil and thicken up a little bit. And we should be all done. Oh, it smells delicious though. It definitely smells great. And also, if you're going to make this recipe but you're not cooking for that many people, you can half everything. So instead of using 2 cups of milk, you'd use 1 cup of milk. Instead of using half a cup of butter, use 1/4 cup of butter. Instead of using 7 to 8 ounces of cream cheese, you'd use 3.5 to 4 ounces of cream cheese. So you can also make this as a smaller portion if you're just cooking for yourself. Or if you want to make the whole size, you can actually freeze the Alfredo, and it makes really good to warm up in the microwave at a later date and time. See, I've let it set. And now my Alfredo is becoming more Alfredo-y, and I'm very excited. I've actually already made the pasta to go with the Alfredo. So after it thickens up, I'm just gonna pour it over and serve. It'll be perfect. Just kind of waiting for the Alfredo now. But like I said, super basic. It didn't even take me more than 5 minutes. You could add chicken, just make sure you cook the chicken first, broccoli, mushrooms. You basically can add anything you want to this recipe. You just gotta mix it in with it. All right, so now I got my pasta. I'm gonna grab a ladle. Ladled it over. I'm gonna mix parsley for garnishing it. And we have Alfredo.